attention, please. All right, we're going to move on to the program. Tom and Brian, come up, please.
It is my privilege tonight to introduce our guest of honor, Captain Noel Ruppert and Captain Andrew Granuza. Both of these gentlemen have served the Navy for a long period of time. When Pixie asked me to do the introduction, I looked up both on the internet and started to compile their list of accomplishments in their long and distinguished naval career. Karen looked at the list and said, if you go through all this, you're going to put everybody asleep. So I've abbreviated, okay? If there's anything of significance that I've missed, gentlemen, it's Karen's fault. This is my ninth Inchon reunion. When we sit around these tables in the evening, oftentimes the discussion turns to our time on the Inchon. When did you serve? Who was the captain on board? And both of these gentlemen's names come up repeatedly. Gentlemen, I will tell you that you are well respected by your Inchon crewmates, and you are part of the Inchon community, and you will always be welcomed at our reunion. Starting with Captain Ruppert. Captain Ruppert joined the Navy, was a naval aviator, and reported initially to Helicopter Anti-Submarine Squadron 5. He flew from the last of the straight deck carriers, the USS Lake Champlain. Over the next several years, his positions included aide and flag lieutenant to Command Carrier Division 14. He was an anti-submarine warfare instructor and had several commands with the different helicopter anti-submarine squadrons. In 1979, he was assigned as XO to the USS Okinawa, and during his stay with the Okinawa, he was promoted to captain. In 1982, he assumed command of the USS Inchon off the coast of Beirut, and obviously, as we all know, we were in Beirut to 1983. 1984, he left the Inchon, and over the next several years, he became commander of Amphibious Squadron 6, which position he had for several years. During this busy part of his life, he also completed a master's degree in business administration. He retired in 1990 and now lives with his wife Carrie in Savannah, Georgia, which hopefully is going to be a location for one of our future reunions. Captain Ruppert's awards include the Legion of Merit with 2 gold stars, Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal, and theater ribbons for operations in Lebanon, the Indian Ocean, Vietnam, and Cuba. So quite a record. Now on a personal note, Captain Ruppert, there's something I want to personally thank you for. Most everybody in this room realizes that I was the General Medical Officer assigned to the USS Inchon in 1982. What most of you don't know is when I took that position, I was only a year out from medical school. And I was now going to be a department head on the USS Inchon. So I had very limited medical skills, and I had no leadership experience. And so here I was, faced with running a medical department. On a weekly basis, myself, a lieutenant, and the other department heads, which were generally lieutenant commanders and commanders, would meet with Captain Ruppert and discuss the issues that were occurring on the ship. As we all are aware, the Inchon was a difficult ship to command because of its numerous issues. We had a lot of engineering issues, we had a lot of mechanical issues, JD was always an issue. And during our departmental meetings with Captain Ruppert at the helm, I got to look at conflict resolution and how a lot of these different issues got resolved. Over the year I spent on the Inchon, I learned a lot from Captain Ruppert as a role model as to how to lead and how to resolve different conflicts and solve different problems. And that is something that personally has benefited me greatly over the last 35 years. So Captain Ruppert, I, and the thousands of patients I've seen over the last 35 years, thank you for what you've done for me personally. Without further ado, Captain Ruppert.
I have copious notes, which I don't plan on using. I have to say, for starters, the 19 months that I spent in command of USS Inchon were unequivocally the best 19 months of my 30-year career.
Wow.
One of the first things I learned was that this isn't a hands-on job. This is a job where you learn to delegate. And we had 6 or 7 department heads, warrant officers, chief petty officers, all of whom I relied on and in whom I trusted, and they did their job. Well, they did their job to the point where they gave us the battle lead, and that was to the department heads, chief petty officers, and the warrant officers, and I am indebted to them. I want to tell a little story before I get to the... actually, what I'm going to do is tell you a couple of war stories about some events that occurred during my tenure. Shortly after we returned from Beirut, that would be in the spring of '83, Carrie and I were not married at the time, but I went out to Oklahoma, and she and her sorority sister, we were driving in her dad's car from Tulsa down to Oklahoma City, doing about 80 in a 65-mile zone, and we got pulled over, and so I got out of the car, walked back. The office of the patrolman said, okay, get in the car, show me your driver's license and registration. And all this time, Carrie and her sorority sisters were looking out the back and wondering what was going on. Well, the patrolman and I started laughing and carrying on, and finally, when I got out of the car and walked around to tell Gail Ann and Carrie what was going on, I said, you know, the patrolman, when I gave him my driver's license, and the driver's license was for USS Inchon. Well, are there any Oklahoma State patrolmen in the room? He served on Inchon 3 years before that time. So we had a gay all the time.
Did you get a ticket?
No, just a warning. Of the chief petty officers on board, they had invited me on 2 or 3 occasions to dine with them in their mess. And quite frankly, I found that a little intimidating. First of all, several of them were a little older than I was at the time, and virtually all of them were a hell of a lot wiser than I was at that time. So it was quite an experience. Of the ship handling side of our job, anytime we had set a sea and anchor detail going into or out of port, or underway replenishments, or quite frankly, transiting either Gibraltar, the Straits of Gibraltar, or the English Channel, this was, you kept you on your toes, because those were ferries that were running back and forth across. They wanted you to hit them so they could sue the government. Of the events that I wanted to talk about, one of them was really exhilarating, one of them was heart attack inducing, and 2 of them were just plain interesting. The exhilarating one was when we were going into Portsmouth, England. We were anchored in the strait between the Isle of Wight and England, and QE2 came in about 1,500 yards to the west of us and anchored, and the wind was coming out of the west, so we could hear the frivolity and the laughter on board, and we're kind of reminiscent, wishing we were doing the same. The next day, the pilot came out and said, "Captain, we had pretty good wind out of the west. I think we should not go into port today. I think we can maybe wait till late afternoon, but we prefer to go tomorrow." Well, we had a cocktail party to go to that evening. I felt at the time, wrongfully probably, that I had been in command long enough that I felt like we could handle the transit into Portsmouth. So we weighed anchor, and we had, if you're familiar with a navigation range, as we go over and start, it was a due north track, and in the range you have a couple of big posts, a little bit inland, and then down toward, down towards the coast, there's one, and as long as you keep the one between the two, you're in the track, you're on the track. So with that westerly wind, as we start up that track, we realized we're not going to be able to head 000 due north. It turns out we were heading 3, 4, 5 degrees, or 15 degrees ahead, coming up that channel. And I had the con at the time because I told the pilot I'm going to take it in, and once we get within the lee, where the wind has died down, I'll turn it over to you. And we had to make a 90-degree turn to the left and another 90-degree turn to the right. I see some heads shaking that were familiar with what we were doing. Anyway, we made the cocktail party on time. Well, now, quite frankly, it wasn't the wisest decision I made during my tenure, and we got away with it. The one that was a little heart attack inducing, this was off the coast of North Carolina, and we were headed south alongside a tanker, underway replenishment, and it was a dense fog, and about something over 10,000 yards we had a contact, and we started monitoring it, and if you all know what CBDR is, constant varying decreasing range. And constant varying decreasing range results in what? A collision. When it got down to about 8,000 yards, I started getting on the horn on a broadcast frequency that every ship at sea is required to monitor 24 hours a day. And we kept calling, ship, you are standing in, we are a ship with restricted maneuverability. We were alongside a tanker hooked up for refueling. When he got into about 7,000 yards and we're still CBDR, I said, okay, this is getting close. And so we said, let's execute emergency breakaway. So we took all our fueling hoses back. I said to the tanker, you turn to starboard. I can't turn to starboard until you were all clear. So I said, okay, let's go all back full, which we did. And I actually saw the freighter coming across our bow. I could read the name of the ship on the stern. I was pumped. Finally, the navigator said, Captain, I think we can get rid of the backing bell now. Well, anyway, that was a little hairy. I guess we were leaving the North Sea, and we were going on some exercise, and we got a email. No, they didn't have this in those days. Got a message to go into the Med, pick up 4 World War II wood-hulled minesweepers and escort them across the pond to Little Creek, which we did. And those 4 little ships in some pretty tough seas, we had to, at some point in time, refuel them. And I don't know, and many of you might know that whether Inchon had done a stern refueling with ships before, but it was a learning experience, and it was an interesting experience because those minesweepers had to get within less than 100 yards of our stern. So I'm not sure if I think we had to have steerage way, so maybe we were doing 6 or 7 knots or something while we did the underway refueling. Once we got all 4 of them refueled, we kind of moved on ahead for a little bit, and Command Master Chief came to me and said, Captain, the crew wants swim call. Hey, we're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. What do you mean you want swim call? There's sharks out there and there's sea monsters out there. We had swim call. And we lowered the port side elevator, and it's still a pretty good drop from maybe 50 feet or so into the water. As a matter of fact, I wouldn't remember this, we did actually put a boat in the water but we did have Marines with their AK-47s or whatever the gun du jour was 34 years ago. It was a very, very successful operation. So, we think we were in the Gulf Stream. I don't remember, but a couple of the guys who did go in, and some of you were here, I think. Yes. It's still water. Water was still a little chilly.
Shrinkage.
What was
Lots of shrinkage that day.
one more, we also operated for a time with HM Helicopter Mine Countermeasures Squadron 16, and they were minesweepers, and what they used for minesweeping was a 600-foot magnetic anomaly detector. And the helicopters would tow this 600-foot cable and identify mines. Well, on the starboard elevator, we put one of these 600-foot cables, because we were testing something, over the side, and it trailed aft, and lo and behold, it got tangled in our propeller, or screw, as we call it. Not a good thing. And when you are at anchor, you have to keep that screw turning over, because otherwise with the boiler, the heat, you could warp a shaft. So we had to get divers out there to free it. Well, we freed it within 24 hours, and that next day I had to go back to Norfolk to a meeting with the admiral that I worked for. So once the screw was freed and the ship was free to get underway, I flew up to Norfolk. Walked in about 10 minutes late to a meeting, expecting to get really nailed by the admiral. Walked in and said, "Captain, I didn't know you had to full start that thing to get underway." And HN-16 debarked after that exercise. They gave me a plaque with a section of that magnetic anomaly detector. Engraved, it says, "When you've got them by the screw, their hearts and minds will follow." You know, I'm sure those of you who recall that we all make our mistakes, and if there were times, probably when we went into Portsmouth, you said, "What the hell was that guy thinking when he did that?" Well, if any of you have kept that in mind for 34 years and want to nail me with it, feel free to do so after this is over, not right now. Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity.